Hello, welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Amarachi Ubani. Here are the headlines. 4 regions vote to join Russia in the just concluded referendum. President Zelensky denounces what he calls Russian staged votes, says there will be good news from the front. Russia to open army enlisting center on the border with Georgia, where massive queues have formed as Russian men try to flee the country to avoid being sent to fight in Ukraine. I will welcome again to the program, and thanks for joining us as you have your morning coffee and start your day with us. I'm Amarachi Ubani. So let's begin. It's pretty certain now that 4 regions in Ukraine have voted to be annexed by Russia, as Russian-installed officials in the occupied regions reported huge majorities following yesterday's referendum. Hastily arranged votes reportedly took place in Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia, and in Kherson. They all make up 15% of Ukrainian territory. Authorities say 98.4% of the people in Luhansk voted to join Russia, 93.1% voted in favor of Zaporizhia joining, and 87% of the people in Kherson voted yes. And here's what's even more interesting. 99.2% of people in the self-proclaimed Donetsk People's Republic voted to join Russia. Officials say all the ballots in the regions have been counted. And how did the voting actually take place? Authorities say ballot boxes were reportedly taken from house to house. The action has been condemned by Ukraine and her allies, who have called the referendum illegitimate and coercive. Russia's parliament says it could take up the decision for these countries to join Russia by next week. The report suggests President Vladimir Putin might want it done sooner. Well, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has announced the vote in the 4 Russian-controlled regions on Tuesday. Called for the action a farce, so that cannot even be called an imitation of a referendum. He says Ukraine will defend its people still living under occupation in the 4 areas where the votes were held. Let's remind you again, the regions are Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson mainly. President Zelensky says there would soon be good news from the front, though. He's keeping mum about the details.
На окупованій території не можна назвати навіть імітацією референдумів.
The farce in the occupied territory cannot even be called an imitation of a referendum. What would be proclaimed as results were known beforehand. Even the intelligence community didn't have to put too much effort into it. The agreed-upon figures of the farce were leaked to the media. Russia is blatant about it. The crime of aggression against our country, the first unoccupied territories, which is called referendum by occupiers, the preparation of a new attempt at the annexation of Ukrainian territory. These are all steps by which Russia finishes off the UN Charter.
One of Ukraine's main allies in the defense against Russia's war, the United States, has condemned the referendums as well. A U.S. ambassador to the UN, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, spoke about it at a news conference on Tuesday. She said the U.S. will introduce a resolution at the United Nations Security Council with Albania to call on member states not to recognize any altered status of Ukraine and to obligate Russia to withdraw its troops. She says the resolution should be up later this week or early next. Russia has the ability, of course, to veto the resolution, but according to Ms. Thomas-Greenfield, if that does happen, the U.S. will look to the UN General Assembly to send a message to Moscow. Just a reminder, the Council has met over 20 times on Ukraine this year, but has been unable to take meaningful action because Russia is a permanent veto-wielding member, along with the United States, France, Britain, and China.
A resolution with Albania that condemns the sham referenda, calls on all states to not recognize any altered status of Ukraine, and obligates Russia to withdraw its troops from Ukraine immediately. We're doing this because, as President Biden said last week, if nations can pursue their imperial ambitions without consequences, then we put at risk everything that this institution stands for. And let me be clear, If Russia uses its veto to shield itself from accountability, we will then look to the UN General Assembly to send an unmistakable message to Moscow. Our plan is to take a vote to the resolution to the General Assembly, if not late this week, early next week. Second question, it's very clear that the Russians are capable of doing this again. They did it in 2014, and now they're doing it again. So I have no doubts in my mind that they will attempt to do it, and that's why it's so important that we stand against this immediately, and that we will do.
Now, Russian authorities say the country is open to making available an army enlistment center on the border with Georgia, where massive queues, of course, have formed as Russian men try to flee the country to avoid being sent to fight in Ukraine. Officers at the Verkhny last crossing will be tasked with serving summons to citizens of the mobilization age. Recent satellite images have shown queues going for miles from Russia. Now, all this crossing into Georgia look exhausted, according to reports on the ground. They're hungry, they're sleep deprived, but relieved to have reached safety. People have been coming in groups of walkers, dragging their suitcases behind them. Others have arrived in car or on bikes. Long queues have also been reported on Russia's border crossings with Mongolia and Kazakhstan. We'll hear more about the Kazakhstan's president's stand on the issue a bit later. China's ambassador to the United Nations, Zhang Jun, told a Security Council meeting yesterday that isolation and sanctions would only lead to a dead end after the United States did call for the body to condemn Russia's referendum in occupied regions of Ukraine. He told the Council bloc confrontation, political isolation, sanctions and pressurization will only lead to a dead end. China has given Russia diplomatic support since Moscow's February 24 invasion of Ukraine. Zhang repeated Beijing's call for negotiations that include the respective legitimate concerns to end the conflict. Now, as regards people in Russia, of course, seeking asylum from the Russian president's call for recruitment into the army, the U.S. White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre says the U.S. will welcome Russians seeking asylum from President Vladimir Putin's unpopular war. It comes as an ally of President Putin issued a stark nuclear warning to Ukraine and the West as Russia began releasing results of referendum, and it builds a prelude to it annexing 4 Ukrainian regions.
We are seeing people sign petitions, and I think the message that they're sending to us very clearly is that this war that Putin started, this war that was started by the Kremlin, is unpopular. And there are people out there in Russia, Russians who do not want to fight Putin's war or put their lives or die for it. And so that has been made very clear. Their message has been made very clear. You know, we continue to say to folks, I know there was a question that was asked about seeking refugee from persecution. You know, we believe that regardless of their nationality, they may apply for asylum in the United States and have their claim adjudicated on a case-by-case basis. So as far as that, we welcome any folks who are seeking asylum, and they should do that. But again, you know, we have talked about the bravery of the Ukrainians fighting this war for the past 6 months and how they're fighting for their freedom. And what we're seeing in Russia are the people of Russia who are saying they do not want this war. They do not support Putin's war.
Let's bring in Associate Professor of Ukrainian Studies at the University of Cambridge, Professor Rory Finnan. Professor, thank you for joining us on the program this morning.
Thanks for having me again.
And I want to begin with the U.S. resolution condemning the referenda in Russian-occupied territory in Ukraine, 4 regions to be exact. And the result of that, authorities say, polls show the people voted overwhelmingly. But with Russia also in the UN Security Council, isn't this resolution already dead on arrival?
The Security Council is broken. The United Nations is broken. They have been broken for a very long time. Russia has to be expelled from the Security Council at the very least. Nothing is constructive done at the United Nations anymore because the obstructive nature of Russian politics is impeding that. So one thing to say at the outset, I admire your program very much, and the terms you use are very precise. That is, you call this program Russian invasion, and that is your viewers understand who's responsible for this war and who could stop this war right now. And with that in mind, I think we should avoid terms like referenda, referendums, because this is a perverse performance of some kind of democratic exercise by an occupier, effectively holding a gun to the head of occupied Ukrainians. And we really shouldn't give it the time of day. The only thing we should pay attention to is what this means for future events. So with this shambolic claiming and seizure and theft of Ukrainian territory, the rationale the Kremlin wishes to use is that now that this is Russian territory, if Ukrainian forces exercise their legal right to self-defense, and in fact to liberate those territories, they may escalate this conflict even further. And we've seen that they have no qualms to do so.
Ukraine has vowed not to give up territory to Russia. Now, if the so-called referendum, however controversial, the people want to join Russia, can authorities prevent that from happening? Can Ukrainian authorities prevent Russia taking on more territory in Ukraine?
They can by winning on the battlefield, which they have been doing, because as you've already reported, the morale in the Russian military is terrible. Their efficacy is poor. They're not able to achieve their objectives on the battlefield. They strike out against civilians in response. They, as we've seen just over the last 24 hours, cause massive problems environmentally with this leak of the Nord Stream pipeline, which clearly, if we were to take the words of Swedish, Danish, German officials, is an act of sabotage by the Russian Federation, which we know has weaponized energy in the past, weaponized energy by withholding it, as we've seen in Ukraine over the past decade, and weaponized energy by providing it at cheap, discounted rates, and therefore encouraging European states like Germany to look the other way as it committed acts of aggression around the world and exported corruption around the world. So I think Ukraine can win this territory back. The only question is what we're all going to do as we see a very desperate Kremlin with a population that tacitly did support this war. I think I disagree with American officials here that indeed there have been majority portions of the Russian population who have supported this war. What they don't support is going and dying and fighting in it. If it's something they can watch on television, that's okay. But if they actually have to go and kill Ukrainian people and attempt to kill Ukrainian soldiers, well, then they're going to flee. So this is a big problem we have with Russian society, this neo-imperial sentiment, which has grown over many years. And this is effectively a new colonizer taking territory, and we need to condemn it full-throatedly.
Yeah, I have seen, some vox pop, some Russians who, as you said, watching the war from a distance, they condemn Ukraine, they support the Russian military. But now that, it's come time for them to join the military that they support, they're all fleeing. And they're fleeing in all directions, aren't they? The U.S., however, says it's open to receiving asylum seekers from Russia. Knowing that the U.S. already is an enemy of Russia, what do you make of this perhaps olive branch the U.S. is probably offering Russians who want to escape Putin's war?
I think politicians in the United States and all European states need to be committed to anyone from any country seeking asylum, including Russians. This has been a problem of Western states, as we've seen, the weaponization of immigrants and refugees. It's been a big problem. So, of course, I welcome the American politicians and the voices of the White House expressing a desire to welcome asylum seekers. And I wouldn't want to exclude Russians from this at all. There is an application process. It's rigorous. But I do think we have a growing demographic crisis in countries like Georgia or Kazakhstan, where tens of thousands of Russians who have been, again, passively or tacitly supportive of this war, which is an act of genocide against the Ukrainian people, because the Kremlin has repeatedly been very, very clear about its intentions to destroy the Ukrainian state, to destroy Ukrainians who subscribe to their own self-standing national identity, who wish to live in their own country and to pursue their own future. So that genocidal intent is very clear. And we saw so many millions in the Russian Federation accept this and support this. So I want to see an olive branch to those who will atone for this horrific war that is targeting so many innocent Ukrainian civilians for no other reason than this desire for conquest, for imperial greatness, to seize territory. So any gestures that show a political solidarity are welcome, but we need to be very clear-eyed about just how dangerous not only the Kremlin but the Russian populace have been in supporting this war and perpetuating it to this point.
No, I have to let you go now, but just very quickly, do you think that President Putin could use nuclear weapons in this war? He said he's not bluffing.
I am a scholar of Ukraine and Ukrainian culture and society, and I leave it to others who work in international relations more directly, who can focus on these questions of nuclear threats. What I will say is that the Russian Federation is desperate. And our question has to be, and the one we have to confront, is whether, in fact, we are prepared to simply accommodate an aggressive state that has repeatedly invaded the territory of its neighbors for many decades now, and allow it to use these threats of devastating nuclear weapons against Ukraine. Very broadly, if you watch Russian state television, there are lots of threats to Poland, NATO states, even the United Kingdom, where they talk about reducing England to a Martian landscape, for instance. This is the rhetoric that's coming out of Russian state television nearly every day. So these threats are dangerous. The question is, do we simply accommodate them? Do we acquiesce? Do we back down? And what are the implications of doing so? Because if we do back down, this type of behavior will metastasize. It will expand. It will get worse. So the best thing we can do right now is not buckle in the face of this saber rattling, which Russia has done for a very long time. This is not the first time they've threatened the use of nuclear weapons. They, in fact, were doing this after 2014, after the annexation of Crimea. So I would say we need to defeat Russia on the battlefield. Ukraine has to win, because the threat to international security is grave if we let this kind of brazen nuclear terrorism take place around the globe.
Thank you so much, Professor Rory Finnan, for your thoughts and analysis on the issues.
Thank you.
We're off on a break now. Still ahead. Sweden's Prime Minister Magdalena Andersson says Nord Stream leaks are most probably caused by deliberate acts. Stay with us. Welcome back. Still watching our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Kazakhstan is struggling to accommodate tens of thousands of Russians who fled their homeland since Moscow announced a military mobilization last week. Officials say the Almaty government has no plans to close its border. Russian men, some with families, started crossing the world's second longest land border en masse after Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered the mobilization of reservists last week amid a stalled military campaign in Ukraine. Russians do not need a visa or even a passport to enter Kazakhstan, but just with their Russian identity papers, they can do that. A Russian language is also widely spoken in the country, which is home to a large ethnic Russian minority. However, the sudden influx of Russians, the government says almost 100,000 of them have crossed the border since the mobilization announcement has stretched the infrastructure of the vast but sparsely populated nation. Hotels and hostels are full and rent has skyrocketed. Kazakh President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev, whose administration has refused to support what Russia calls a special military operation in Ukraine, has called for patience and tolerance among citizens. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says it would be in no one's interest if attacks or acts of sabotage caused gas leaks detected in the Nord Stream gas pipelines amid an energy standoff between Europe and Russia over gas supplies. Both Moscow and Western European capitals have expressed concern over the multiple leaks spewing gas into the sea, which occurred as Russia slashed gas deliveries to Europe after the West imposed sanctions over the invasion of Ukraine. And while speaking at a press conference in Washington alongside India's Foreign Minister Subramanian Jaishankar, Blinken said initial reports indicating the leaks may be a result of an attack or some kind of sabotage, but it's not been confirmed. The White House says the United States is ready to provide support to European partners conducting an investigation. Blinken also added that his understanding was that the leaks would not have a significant impact on Europe's energy resilience, reiterating that Washington is working to address energy security for Europe in the short and long term.
Indicating that this may be the result of an attack or some kind of sabotage, but these are initial reports and we haven't confirmed that yet. But if it is confirmed, that's clearly in no one's interest. Now, my understanding is the leaks will not have a significant impact on Europe's energy resilience. And what's critical is that we are working day in, day out, both on a short-term basis and a long-term basis, to address energy security for Europe and for that matter around the world. We are working on implementing the oil price cap to keep Russian oil flowing, but at a steep discount. That, of course, will deny Russia excess revenues that it would use to prosecute its aggression against Ukraine, and at the same time, as I said, keep oil flowing on world markets.
The reactions from Europe are also pretty clear. Poland's foreign minister has said that Russian hybrid war could be the reason behind the Nord Stream pipeline leaks. Speaking at an event for the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington, he said an investigation should be launched into the matter without excluding the possibility of sabotage. While the European Union is already on it, it's investigating what Germany, Denmark and Sweden believe to be attacks which caused major leaks into the Baltic Sea from the two Russian gas pipelines at the center of an energy standoff. It remains, however, far from clear who might be behind the leaks and were first reported on Monday, or any foul play, if proven, of the Nord Stream pipelines that Russia and European partners spend billions of dollars building.
Wanted to perhaps intimidate Baltic Sea states, with the exception of Russia. Right now, all of them are already NATO member states or aspiring NATO member states. If you bear in mind that these 4 lines of Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 cross somewhere under the surface of the water, Baltic pipe, this would be a clear indication that the same could happen to the newly open pipe. Certainly, an international investigation has to be launched. But if you're asking me about my more personal opinion, I can tell you that the timing of these 3 explosions are very meaningful, so to speak. Russia has lost operational initiative on the ground in Ukraine.
Well, we mentioned Sweden before. Prime Minister Magdalena Andersson says the 2 blasts have been detected in relation to the leaks of the Nord Stream pipelines, with information suggesting likely sabotage, though this did not represent an act of war against Sweden. Which told a news conference on Tuesday, the Swedish government is in close contact with partners such as NATO and neighbors such as Denmark and Germany concerning the developments. Joining me now is a lawyer and managing partner at First Chronicles LP here in Lagos, Yinka Oyeniji. Thank you so much for making time for us this morning. And it's great to see you again. It's been a really long time, so imagine how surprised I am or how pleasant it is to actually have you on the show. So, but
I hope I'll be able to see you for a long time to come.
Hopefully you will. Hopefully you will. Let's talk about the Nord Stream pipeline for a bit before we go on to other issues regarding the Russia-Ukraine crisis. This blasted Nord Stream pipeline, you think it was likely sabotage as Sweden, Denmark, and the other countries in Europe are insinuating?
I don't think we should be in any doubt that there must be an act of sabotage involved here. I was listening to the representative of the Polish government speaking, and of course you look at the timing and you can't say that this is coincidental. Okay, what are the developments that we have seen from Russia in the past few days? There's been a forced conscription of its citizens, okay, to go to war in Ukraine. Okay, that's number one. Number two, been also those forced referendums in regions of Ukraine so that Russia will be looking at annexing those regions in the next couple of days. Now that tells us all of a sudden that this war is moving in a different dimension. I thought about it this morning and I said the gloves are off. So Putin is not going to stop at anything to try to hound every country around that region into either becoming helpless to support or to further support Ukraine or to annex and then to expand his control over that region. This is sabotage. It is sabotage if you look at the fact that even the EU has telltale signs of the negative impact of the war on its economy across countries, and we have an energy crisis on our hands. So that gas is critical for everybody else. So Putin turns off the gas, and then the next thing we also find out that there are leaks. It's just trying to oppress. For the first time, I just thought terrorism may even be greater than war, because in war, you also still have rules of engagement. But to start to crash national heritage, international infrastructure of significance, it's a whole different ballgame entirely. There is sabotage at the base of this nonetheless.
That's an interesting perspective. This could be terrorism on the part of Russia. And I want to explore that a little bit more, because the implication of this, of course, would be greater, because many European countries are already trying to negotiate gas deals as the winter months come. So it would be a bit difficult having to find new sources. But let's talk about the terrorism, that you think that Russia is perpetrating in Ukraine and on the rest of the world. And it is interesting, isn't it, that, terrorism is being perpetrated not by guns and, bombs and weapons, but Russia is weaponizing gas and oil against the rest of the world.
Yeah, that's correct, 100%. And it's possibly so. The reason why this kind of discourse is interesting for those of us in Africa and developing countries is that we learn. Okay, so for me, for the first time, I'm hearing that other European countries contributed into building that infrastructure, which is, of course, expected considering the magnitude of it and the cost elements of it. But for those of us around developing countries as well, like in the west of Africa, we have the Green Belt Initiative, we have the railway lines cutting across continent, we even have the AFCTA that we are looking at to collaborate across the region. What then happens when we start to step up, okay, in the pursuit of economic relevance in the world or international power? What has happened is that the rest of the world helped Russia to become as economically viable as it is today, building infrastructure that can service so many countries all at once. But look, there are options that are not humane that Putin is pushing. And it's not Russia, it's just Putin. In the same way, he's conducting referendums to turn Ukrainians against their own valid government. It is the same way he is attacking the source of power. It's the same way that he's conscripting citizens to go fight a war that they are not interested in. And I won't be surprised. He's been guarding against this for the last 90 days or plus, that Putin himself will be facing internal insurrection back at home, because remove Putin as president of Russia, then all of this ends. He started this at least 3 years ago. He was laying the groundwork. He annexed Crimea, and then he went to parliament to extend his tenure by almost another 30 years or so. So these are all planned towards having local relevance at home and being able to harm the rest of the world. So is doing things that he will have to answer for. If he succeeds at this, or he survives this, he's going to have to face international war crimes of different magnitude just because he wants to retain power. So terrorism, these are acts of terrorism, okay, sabotage, acts of terrorism, which is on another scale, all right, different from a supposed legitimate invasion of Russia, of Ukraine, as he wants the rest of the world to believe. Nobody is going to believe that. This is not even war that is legitimate. This is just invading another country, annexing regions, attacking. You know that he did attack Ukrainian power plants, okay? He's doing the same thing with infrastructure that have taken years to build. And then it's a lesson for the rest of us that we must exercise some element of control over joint ownership of international infrastructure of significance.
Once again, another really interesting perspective. Now, the European Union and the Western countries, NATO and the US and all the other countries have imposed several sanctions on Russia already. They're having little or no impact on Russia's economy. Russia's showing the rest of the world it can survive. There are other alternatives to trade and partnerships with the European Union and with Western countries. What do you think, would be the end of the war, the situation that we could find on the ground? Because there are countries who do still support Russia. China is one of them, providing diplomatic support for Russia. And even though it's denied, it's also providing Russia with weapons. Supposing this war ends soon and it is in its 7th month, what would be the situation the rest of the world will be looking at the end of the war?
It's terrible, and the war is not going to end soon. I was thinking about it yesterday. The only reason why this war will end soon is something happened to Putin. Either is ousted from government, okay? Let's put it at that, okay? If Putin stops or his tenure or something happens and he relinquishes power in Russia, the war will end immediately. And do not think that the rest of the world is not looking at that option. But I mean, we would all be closing our eyes to the obvious if we think that the rest of the world is not looking for a way to get Putin out of government. His health is supposedly failing. The machinery of the media has been twisted in different directions to apply pressure on Putin himself and his personal health conditions. However, it is not correct that Putin is not enjoying support. China, just like you stated, is supporting Putin. However, all of this war has peculiar impact on economies of the world. I'm going to name them to you. Germany is in recession. And I mean, it's down to power. You don't have power to sustain your economy. You cannot import grains from Ukraine or import grains from Russia. Then it's putting a lot of pressure on EU itself. Food crisis, okay? Secondly, the United States is in recession, even if we are not talking about it. Thirdly, the United Kingdom is dangerously approaching recession. By January, something drastic would have to happen in the United Kingdom. Either the free fall of the pound is arrested, or extreme measures will have to be taken to keep the economy of the United Kingdom afloat. The rest of the world, the only region that is not exactly taking advantage of what is happening in Russia at the moment is, well, Africa. Countries in Africa, for example, this would have been a fabulous opportunity for us to export agricultural produce and arrest an imminent food crisis. There is famine on the horizon. Secondly, we could have done better with our gas exports and oil exports. And just yesterday, the price of the Brent also was on a free fall, which means that countries like Nigeria cannot expect to earn as much as we do from oil exports. But we could have taken the opportunities. So this war won't end soon. It is not sustainable nonetheless. We can't go on fighting this war for a while, okay? But the impact is negative all across. And you hear the representative of the United States Secretary of Defense saying that we cannot shut our eyes to the impact of the gas leaks that we have. The war is not working for anybody, all right? Military power that has been stockpiled for a very long time are being wasted and frittered away at this time. And the world cannot come together, for example, to start to talk about the realistic fulfillment of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals 2030. We have wasted at least 1 year talking about a war, loss of lives, putting lives at risk, stopping education, stopping medical care, and all of that, only for this war. Its impact is going to be far-flung to different parts of the world.
But the rest of the world, I'm sorry, I'm cutting in here, the rest of the world is feeling the impact of this war, except Russia, apparently. You've mentioned we've discussed this over and over again, the impact of the war on the rest of the world. But what about Russia, which is showing that there is an alternative to the Western way of doing things?
No, it's also, it's again foolhardy for us to think that Russia is not feeling the impact. Russia is losing military power. Russia is losing lives. The government is losing popularity at home. The only reason why Putin went to war was to validate his own government. That was the only thing Russia would be able to hear, to keep Putin in power, to say, oh, we are the lead in our region. That's the only reason. There's no development in Russia at the moment. Russia is facing insurrection. Russia is facing human rights abuses at home. So the rest of the world, the Western powers will separate Russia from Putin, all right? Russia is suffering. Putin may not, okay, because he's in government. Now, you were talking about sanctions and all of that, and I just read Canada has also decided to issue sanctions against those involved in these sham referendums. So the individuals, a few selected individuals who took part in the referendum would receive sanctions which will attack their financial competence. And the same thing will happen. There's just too much pressure coming on Putin. It's too far gone to turn back, but the war is not sustainable, all right? So Russia is losing. It cannot develop anything. It's losing funds. It's losing its human capacity. It's looking for people to fight this war. Only Putin seems to be enjoying what is going on. Russians don't want this war.
Interesting. No one wants a war, not even in Russia, not Ukraine, and certainly not the rest of the world. Yinka Oyeniji, thank you so much for joining me this morning.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure.
We're on another break now. When we return, we hear from Germany's economy minister, Robert Habeck, who says Germany plans to extend the lifespan of 2 nuclear power plants. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching the last lap of the program this morning. Unacceptable and would have severe consequences, NATO is reporting on the situation of nuclear warnings to Ukraine and the West by Russia. A warning came on Tuesday by Dmitry Medvedev, the deputy chairman of Russia's Security Council. It's also one of several issued by President Vladimir Putin and his associates in recent weeks. Analysts say that they're designed to deter Ukraine and the West by hinting at a readiness to use tactical nuclear weapons to defend newly annexed territory, where Russian forces have faced strong Ukrainian counter-offensives in recent weeks. Well, Germany, on the other hand, plans to place 2 of its last nuclear power plants, Isar 2 and Neckarwestheim, as reserves until April 15 next year. It will also decide whether to extend the lives of this year, depending on the nuclear power situation in France, according to Economy Minister Robert Habeck. Germany had planned to complete a phase-out of nuclear power by the end of this year. But a collapse in energy supplies from Russia due to the war in Ukraine has prompted the government to keep 2 plants on standby until April. Well, Habeck says the developments in France in recent weeks has been significantly worse than actual forecasts concerning recent leaks in Germany's largest gas pipelines, Nord Stream 1 and 2. A German minister later assessed the cause to be targeted attacks. He says it can be safely assumed that it did not happen by natural occurrence or fatigue of material, but that actual attacks have been carried out on infrastructure. He was saying this at an event yesterday. So we have our business correspondent here, Laddie Williams.
Good morning.
This close to saying Laddie Akredulali.
Almost.
Just that close. Yeah, as long as you don't call me Laddie anyway.
Yeah.
So we're looking at markets though. But before that, of course, the Nord Stream pipelines that have been attacked. Let's look at the impact of that. How much is Europe losing, by these attacks happening?
So we know how Europe has been struggling, with gas supplies from Russia. But this is another big blow. And it looks like Europe will have to do without significant supply of gas, going into the winter. But we've seen, Europe made plans to get more LNG and stock up on gas, at this time, and that's actually going to help cushion, some of the losses they'll see with Russian gas flow with this sabotage. Some analysts are saying it could be Russia attacking itself, but at the same time, it's going to put more pressure, on Europe, getting the gas, and obviously the manufacturing industry, would suffer, with this, and the chemical producers, in Europe will also get an impact, from this supply disruption for gas. But at the end of the day, they're making plans, to get more LNG, which is also, going to impact, how much LNG the Asian economies get, because they also rely on, LNG for, their gas production. But at the end of the day, we're seeing Europe make plans, and this would actually help somehow, cushion the effect, that we'll see from this supply disruption, coming from Russia.
Wow, so more terrible winter ahead.
Yeah, it's looking quite scary.
If they don't plug this in time. So let's go to your favorite topic now, and that's the global markets, which are poised to rise. Looked poised to rise yesterday, but not looking good today. You're going to be talking about that in a few minutes. But let's talk about the oneization of the Russian economy. Unpack that for us, Laddie. What's that all about?
Yeah, so we've seen that campaign for the de-dollarization, of the Russian economy, because at the end of the day, the sanctions, the financial sanctions on Russia have, disrupted how they do business, globally. And most assets are priced in dollars, so they have to use dollars for their global and international trade. But now Russia has tried to move away from the US dollar to reduce reliance on it, so they can go on with their trades, even though they have all these sanctions. But now the next best currency is the yuan. So they've been using because obviously China is one of their biggest, trading partners. So they're able to, use the yuan for trades with China, ruble for yuan, or if they're trading with other countries also, they're trying to see how they can, remove that reliance from the US dollar. And they also have other friendly currencies like the Turkish lira and the dirham, but there are limitations.
They're not as strong as the one.
But not as strong. There are limitations to those currencies, but obviously the yuan is the next best thing. So they're moving, more towards use of the yuan, and we're seeing some big, companies in Russia actually buying yuan bonds, at this time. So it's moving on just right, but there are concerns, even though, some Russian experts are saying this is good, less reliance on the dollar, but some other experts see this as kind of like a risk, for Russia, because at some point China could decide to devalue the yuan, and that would, impact, most of these investors and traders that are using the yuan at this time. But in the long term, it could also be a positive, for a country like Russia.
Yeah, but I worry about the sustainability of that. I mean, Nigeria tried to do the same thing with China, right? But that didn't work out eventually in the end.
But at the end of the day, we know long term, it could work out, but short term is tough because Russia don't really have, the what they need, at this time. The economy is not, set up for a yuan a trade, at this time. But in the long run, it could somehow, help them since they're trying to move away from the U.S. dollar.
I thought they'd push the ruble stronger.
And also the ruble, too.
Yeah,
they're pushing the ruble at the same time.
Well, Ladi, won't delay you any further.
Yeah.
I know you have a lot more on this and some other issues from the world of business, especially here in Nigeria.
Exactly.
And we didn't even talk about the market. Stock and oil prices are dropping. What's driving sentiments today?
Yeah, the markets are hammered today. We saw, kind of an uptick yesterday with most of the global markets, but that was the dollar actually easing because the dollar has been on a rampage, this year, with the U.S. raising rates. But we're seeing the dollar moving again, compared to 6 other currencies. We're talking about the DXY, the dollar index, that's rising today. So we're seeing the markets actually hammered. All the gains we saw yesterday wiped off today.
Wow. That's good and bad news, depending on what side you belong.
Exactly.
Thank you.
If you're a dip buyer, good news for you.
Yeah.
But if you already bought the top, bad news.
Well, I won't ask you what side you're on. We'll keep that a secret. Thanks again.
Thank you.
So as we move on, sports now. Conflict in Russia continues. Ukraine's Shakhtar Donetsk will train in the Polish city of Warsaw at the training center of Leisure Warsaw Football Club. Shakhtar Donetsk is preparing for upcoming matches on the league and UEFA Champions League. Shakhtar will play against Metalist in the league and will have an away match against Real Madrid in the Champions League on October 5th. The Orange and Blacks had a training session with available players under the watchful eyes of coach Igor Jovicevic. Newcastle reportedly preparing a £50 million bid for Ukraine and Shakhtar Donetsk winger Mikhailo Murdoch once the transfer window reopens in January. Ukraine international has emerged as one of the most sought-after youngsters in world football and has been likened to PSG superstar Neymar in recent months following his sharp rise. The Magpies, who are ready to make the first move in the first year as they look to see off competition from Arsenal. And away from sports news, German opposition leader Friedrich Merz found himself under fire on Tuesday, pointing out that some Ukrainians who sought shelter in his country keep going home and back while accepting welfare benefits. He apologized, but the mayor of Przemysl in Poland, who said much the same thing on Monday, has not. According to him, we're now experiencing welfare tourism from these refugees to Germany, back to Ukraine, to Germany, back to Ukraine. His comments drew a flurry of condemnation from the ruling coalition. According to state broadcaster Deutsche Welle, Interior Minister Nancy Faeser of the Social Democratic Party accused Merz of using Ukrainian women and children to make a political point, while the parliamentary leader of the Free Democrats, Christian Dior, said Merz's words were absolutely out of place. Poland, however, reveals a number of crossings from Ukraine and more. Is faced with such onslaught. Of course, Merz apologized, saying he regretted using the word welfare tourism. That was an inaccurate description of a problem reserved in individual cases. He said this in a tweet, and it has been accepted. But while Germany has taken in almost 1 million refugees from Ukraine, Poland is dealing with more than 4 times that number. According to the mayor of Przemysl, a city of some 60,000 people right on the Ukrainian border, he wrote on Facebook that some Ukrainian refugees were engaged in organized system of extorting social benefits. Google to inoculate Eastern Europeans against disinformation read more. Google to inoculate Eastern Europeans against disinformation. It is important not to notice the organized transports of women and children who have cards with written instructions on the procedures they have to undergo in order to receive material and financial assistance, describing how they line up outside the government offices every day to get benefits. Then in organized transport, they return to Ukraine. Well, We'd close in a moment, but of course, just very quickly, a video published by the Ukrainian commander of the Special Military Intelligence Unit, Kraken, appeared to show Ukrainian forces in control of the Kupiansk railway hub in the Ukrainian region of Kharkiv. The commander was seen in a video standing on top of a Russian flag near a pole and hoisting it up on a Ukrainian flag, hoisting up a Ukrainian flag in its place. And that's it for now. We'll have an update at 5. Join us then.